they get an extraordinary life sentence almost. Well, don't you think they're different when they're 60 or 70? You know, isn't it time to let them go? And then the next item here is reform parole revocation. This was an eye-opener for me. So people are out on parole after being released from prison, and they are subject to the whims, you might say, of their probation or parole officer, because if they just break a rule, a probation rule, which could be, I listed them here, accepting a job without telling your probation officer, without getting permission from the probation officer, unauthorized use of a cell phone or a computer. We take that all for granted, don't we? They have to get permission. Borrowing money, stepping over county line. I live in Beloit. You know how easy it would be to step over into Illinois, a different county? Extremely easy. Extremely easy. Failure of the GPS unit. That's the ankle bracelet. There is a massive failure of GPS units. For all of those, in fact, here's a story that we heard in Milwaukee at a rally. A gentleman who was had the GPS unit. The GPS reading was that he was out in the middle of Lake Michigan. And we all laughed, just like, you know, it sounds ridiculous. But he said it wasn't funny because he ends up in prison for it. Until they can prove that it was a failure of the GPS unit, he goes to prison. All of these 5 areas that I named, they go back to prison. They don't have a chance to stand before a judge. They don't have a chance for a trial. They just go back to prison. So we've got 4,000 people now in prison because of violation of parole. They did not commit a crime. They broke a rule. They don't have a chance for a trial or stand before a judge. And the interesting thing is, the people up here in TAD, Treatment Alternatives, they stand before a judge every week because they have to be accountable. These people that break a rule for parole never have a chance to go before a judge. They just go back to prison. We have 4,000 people in prison because of breaking rules, not for crimes. 4,000 times 52,000.
$200 million.
There you go. I mean, so when we ask for $20 million for this year and $20 million for next year, it's very easy if some of this stuff was corrected. We call it a Department of Correction, but they need correcting.
Here.
So, a person who is revoked, I already said that, and imprisonment for having revocation of their parole could last years or even decades. So it's not go back for a few months.
They don't get credit for time served, they have to reserve their sentence.
They have to reserve it. Doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't make sense. It's wasting our dollars, but more than wasting our dollars, it's wasting humanity. These are people that are disconnected from or separated from their families. Many of them have children without a parent. We are ruining humanity through it. So the next item here is remove barriers for successful reentry. Many people who have a felon conviction have a hard time getting a job. I mentioned that once before. The good thing about our 2015-2017 budget, there is money in there for transitional jobs in Beloit. That's already in Milwaukee, and it's going to be expanded to Beloit. We would like to see it expanded throughout the whole state. If it was, do you understand what transitional job training is? They have a chance to work at a company.
The wages are subsidized.
The wages are subsidized, so they can work for 6 months in a company, and sometimes they get hired. I think about 50% actually get hired for full-time employment. So it helps them. those who are felons, it just helps them to take that next step of being employed, which makes a huge difference. The budget should include 50 million annually for a statewide program that could help 6,000 people get transitional jobs. So our goal is to keep pushing the envelope, get them not only in Milwaukee and Beloit, but get them throughout the whole state so that 6,000 people can benefit from it. Then the other thing is transitional housing. When they get out of prison, I did not know this until about a year ago, that if somebody gets out of prison, and maybe it's a man and he comes home and his wife is on subsidized housing, he cannot move in with her. That's right. Well, that just causes more, compounds the problem. Now, you can't live there because she's getting subsidized housing, possibly because she has children to take care of, and he's in prison, and there's no income coming in. So one thing just compounds to another thing. And then another area that we can remove the barrier, and we're going to work on this through Joe, it's called Ban the Box. I raised that question at a forum last week, and none of the council members knew what Ban the Box was, and I don't know how many of you here have ever heard that term, Ban the Box. Okay, so a couple of people have. Ban the Box means that when you fill out an application form for employment, and there's a little box there, it says, have you ever been convicted of a felon? And you have to check it. If you don't check it, and they find out later, you can lose your job. If you do check it, you might not get the job to begin with. But we want to work that in the city of Beloit. That will be taken off the application. And we could do that here in Janesville too if we got your support. Get it off the application for any city employees. Because if they can get to the interview and proven to be a good candidate for the job, and their past record has nothing to do with the job, then why not let them get hired? So it gives them that chance to get an interview. And another area where barriers could be removed is called CCAP. Anybody familiar with that? CCAP? CCAP is a state-administered database, and anybody can go to it and find out if somebody has a record, or if you know somebody who's in prison, you can find out why they're in prison. Anybody can go to it. Well, what happens is the information stays there forever, but the other thing that happens is somebody could be arrested, but then the charges are dropped, their name stays there. So that needs to be changed. And the other thing is misdemeanors. You're arrested for some misdemeanor, that should be dropped eventually. And then for felonies, maybe after 10 years, it should be dropped. So you're not hung with this forever. And then people who use the database should have to sign in. You know, many times when you go to something on the computer, you have to sign in, you have to have a password, etc. Well, for this, you don't have to. So anybody can use it and misuse it as well. And then the last item here, establish principles of restorative justice. That means let's help the prisoner and the victim get back into circulation. Healing for the prisoner, healing for the victim. That's what a Department of Correction should do, is help them to be rehabilitated and then work with those who are victims as well. So then we move to this one. Ask. These are our asks because we have 4 of them. $20 million in the 2015, that's annually, so it's actually $40 million in this budget. And then release 421 parole eligible inmates. These are people who are already out in the community. Are you aware that there are prisoners who are working in communities, and then they go back to prison to sleep, and then they go out and work in the community? Well, if they are so safe to be out in the community, then don't you think we could release them? 421 are out in the community already. Let's get them out of our prison, set them free.
Are those old law prisoners?
It's in the parole area.
Oh, okay. Oh.
and a parole area. And there probably is old law as
It
well.
could be old law.
Yeah, it could be,
Could be.
because both of those are parole things, yes. And then revised solitary confinement policies. We house people in solitary confinement sometimes for decades.
Oh.
Now, there is a replica of a solitary confinement cell that we hope to have in our area sometime. It's actual size of a cell in Waupun. And it was in Madison for a while. I had an opportunity to go inside of it. There also is a recording inside of it of the actual noise that people hear in a solitary confinement cell. And you cannot imagine it. And this happens 24 hours a day, every day of the week. The only time it's quieter is when they're eating, maybe 10 minutes for each meal. It's like banging on pipes, howling, screaming, horrendous noise. And when I was in that replica in Madison, a couple of people who used to be in prison said that's exactly how it sounds. So not only is it a box that they're in for 24 hours, I think maybe they get out for 1 hour a day, but I saw a video about it. They get out for 1 hour a day to be outside in another box. It's got screen walls, but they're in another box outside. They don't have a chance to move much. So solitary confinement has to be revised, the policies. The UN says that if you're confined for more than 15 days, it is considered torture. Torture, 15 days. We have somebody in Beloit, her adopted son has been in there for, I believe she said a couple of years, I can't remember exactly. And he has actually gone, he's had some, he was born with alcohol syndrome.
He's nuts now. He's completely nuts.
Yeah, and
Gotta be.
because of being in solitary confinement so long, they said they barely recognized him when they visited him, and he couldn't even talk anymore. Because it does psychological and physical damage to people. And we in Wisconsin are keeping people in solitary confinement way, way too long.
Where does that noise in the cell come from? Is that from the prison or is it piped in?
I suspect it's other prisoners just making noise
Okay,
because
sure.
you get driven nuts and something like that. So if we are successful in getting that replica in our area, you'll be able to sit in there for an hour, get a sense of what it's like compared to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I heard once that it's used for, Mike?
I was gonna say that, I heard in Wisconsin that 50% of people that get tossed into solitary try to commit suicide.
Yeah.
The penalty for trying to commit suicide and not being
Solitary.
successful is they give you another year in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
That really makes sense.
So, do we need a change in solitary confinement policies? Yes. Let's treat people with human dignity. You know. I came home after learning about solitary confinement. I said to my husband, "What do you think solitary confinement is, and how is it used?" Well, if somebody acts up or something, they get thrown in there for a while. I had no idea that it was for years. Years. Doesn't make sense. He had no idea it was for years either. So I understand that sometimes it's used for mental condition. They need to be taken care of for their mental condition, not thrown into solitary and make it worse. And I also heard, and I don't know if this is true, that it might be used for overcrowding. So if the prison is too crowded, just throw them into the solitary. But it costs a lot more for solitary confinement than regular. And then,
Just a second, we put that tape up there, it'd be 10 feet high, about 6 feet wide, just to give people a little bit of a view.
yeah.
Solitary.
And in there you have a cement bed, maybe with a really light blanket. You have a latrine. That's about it.
A lot of noise apparently.
And a lot of noise, a lot of noise. If I find that YouTube video, there are 3 videos about solitary confinement, and I get it to you, Chuck.
Are there windows?
What's that?
Are there windows?
No, no windows.
Just in your door, there's a slot.
And this particular cell is from Waupun. There might be other solitaries in other prisons that do have a window.
I don't think so.
And then the last part is reform revocation process. And because excessive, this here part, excessive imprisonment because of breaking a rule is not helpful for anybody. Now, some things to do, some things you can do. First of all, stay informed. I have some brochures over there about 11 by 15, you can all have one. And on the back of it is a website you can go to, and you'll get tons and tons and tons of information. You'll also be able to read stories from prisoners. They've collected stories from prisoners and made actually a book out of it. So get the brochure and read the brochure, but also check the website. And then April 29th is a legislative day in Madison. And we are going to have a bus leaving from Beloit. If there's enough people from Janesville, we'd make a stop along I-90 to pick you up. If we get 40 people, I think, we'll get a bus for free. If we don't have 40 people, we'll have to be on our own. So we really invite you to attend, because what happens, it's a full day, sponsored by many different people. I think I sent that to you, Chuck, didn't I?
I don't remember. I'll look for it.
Okay, look for it and send it out to your people. So the beginning of the day is some speakers, and then we break into groups, those who are focusing on the 11 by 15, or those who are focusing on immigration, or those who are focusing on whatever. And there will be some breakout groups. Then we have lunch, then we walk up to the Capitol, and we meet with our legislators. And we're coached beforehand of what to talk about. So it's an excellent day. We let our legislators know that we're coming, and it's a chance to let them know what we're thinking. And then this is another opportunity to volunteer for reentry. Mike and Deb, you got information about that. In Beloit, we have a post-release group that is like a subgroup of working on the 11 by 15 issues, and it's helping people re-enter the community. So can you say anything about that?
Well, you have to remember that of all the people we get tough on crime with and send them to jail, 95% of them get out.
Yes.
So what kind of people do you want living next to you, or down the block, 2 blocks over, or across from your neighborhood school? If you do all these bad things to them when they're in jail, and they have a lot of them don't have life skills, they don't know how to manage money, some of them are pretty hopeless. So what do hopeless people do? Well, whatever they feel like, because there's no consequences if you're hopeless, so that's what we need to do and it's gotta be a community effort. I mean, my personal opinion is the criminal justice system does a great job of locking people up. But they don't do a great job of restoring people to be, I think our societal buy-in was, well, you guys take care of it. They do a great job of half of it, they don't do a great job with the other half.
Helping them get out. Right. So we're actually looking for some volunteers to work with a group called the Fatherhood Initiative in Beloit, because some of them are people that were formerly incarcerated. And if we can help them get on their feet so that they can have employment skills and whatever things they need.
Transitional housing, employment.
So this Friday, there's something called Fridays with Fathers, something like that, at Pathway Center, at the Eclipse Center in Beloit. And they're going to kind of showcase what they do. And we're looking for volunteers to just do a one-on-one with these guys. And then sign the petition. I have a petition over here it's a national effort to change the policy of solitary confinement. And I'd like to have all of you sign it before you leave tonight. So that's my part, and I took way much longer than you asked me to. But there's a lot of information.
That was really.